We've solicited over 16,000 tips since the program went into effect.
Good, good. Well, thanks again, Chairman Garrett. Thank you.
Gentleman from Massachusetts, 5 minutes recognized.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses for their help on this issue. Mr. Butler, I was a member of this committee during the financial crisis going back to 2008, and I think it is beyond any reasonable doubt that the rating agencies played an important role as a facilitator of that crisis, and they not only amplified the intensity of the crisis, but also, I think, facilitated the wider scope of that crisis as well. And you know, independent researchers and investigators, as well as the Justice Department, have basically said that the sort of pay-to-play role that or system that's been in place where customers pay for ratings, and that the conflict of interests on the part of the rating agencies contributed greatly to the problems we had back then, and that model has to change. Now, since the crisis, your agency hasn't instituted any fundamental changes in the credit agency business model that created those conflicts of interest, and credit rating agencies have returned to record profits. Your own most recent examinations have found severe failures by major credit agencies to comply with their own stated policies and procedures, yet you have not levied any fines or penalties on rating agencies. You've not used your statutory authority under Section 15E of the Security Exchange Act to suspend agencies or individuals from ratings, and the Office of Credit Ratings Public Examination do not even identify. They don't even identify the specific rating agencies that violate procedural rules. You don't even call them out. No name and shame. It seems to me that the system is designed really to shield the rating agencies from any accountability. We don't even identify the people. You know, we use terms like one of the larger rating agencies, which I assume is one of the big three. You know, your testimony states that the OCR attempts to serve the public interest and protect users of credit ratings, but I got to ask you, do you really believe that we can get to that place without eliminating the conflict of interest that currently exists, where companies pay the rating agencies for favorable credit ratings, and that the companies are in competition with each other? There's a great segment in The Big Short, that movie, where they're talking to one of the folks from Standard & Poor's, and the analyst asks, why aren't you tougher on or more demanding in these guidelines? And the woman from Standard & Poor's says, well, if we do, they'll just go to Moody's. And that sort of encapsulates the problem here. So what's the answer here? I mean, as long as we have that conflict of interest, are we ever going to get to a place where we're actually, as you know, your mission states, are we going to be able to protect the users of credit ratings?
In my estimation, compliance is not a destination, but it's a journey. And we're well along on that journey with regard to the rating agencies, and in infusing in them the importance of compliance, enhanced governance, training, transparency, training, and other methods to build rigor within the rating process and to establish integrity. To address specifically your question with regard to the issuer pays conflict, in August 2014, the Commission adopted a new set of rules, and the rules were effective fully in June of 2015. Importantly, within that set of rules, there is a requirement for a complete separation of the sales and marketing function from the analytical function. And that's accomplished by prohibiting rating analysts or developers of methodology from participating in sales and marketing activities, or from being influenced by other business considerations. And apart from the prohibition—
Let me just stop you there, because I've only got 30 seconds left. Your report says that they're departing from their own policies and that they're not following their own programs, that and those companies are not being held accountable under your system, the one you've got right now. So, and that's after this last iteration of changes has come forward. They're still paying for ratings. They're still paying for ratings. They know, the rating agencies know where their deal flow comes from, and they're acting accordingly. I don't see any changes here compared to what we were doing before.
And I thank the gentleman.
Rule and how that's going to play out on the expense side and how we're going to get more
Gentleman's
people than, I know. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Thank you. I would point out that I think it was Congress's intention that the SEC and the Department of Labor have very similar or identical roles. It is absurd to think that IRA accounts would have one set of protections and non-IRA, non-pension accounts would have another. And it's even more absurd to say that the IRA accounts, typically controlled by those in their 50s and 60s, should have more protection than widows and widowers and elderly people who are typically in middle-class families control the larger accounts. So I share some of the last gentleman's concerns. Mr. Chairman, the one part of the SEC we don't have before us are those concerned with accounting standards. I'd like to enter into the record my letter of earlier this month demonstrating the incredible harm that is being done to our economy by the departure from accepted accounting theory that requires companies to write off their research and experimentation costs. Thank you. Mr. Butler, we're still suffering from this 2008 downturn. I think it was mostly caused by the credit rating agencies. We still have a system where the umpire is paid by one of the teams and selected by that team. And the SEC has decided to, instead of being an agency that favors transparency for investors, has decided to conceal this by such relatively meaningless so-called protections. It says, well, the sales force can't talk to those who do the ratings. The people who do the ratings are compensated by the company. Their promotions depend upon the company. They want the company to be successful. Is there any rule that those engaged in rating debt obligations cannot receive stock options, bonuses, or any benefit from the success of the company they work for? Mr. Butler.
Each of the companies has different compensations arrangements.
I asked, is there any SEC prohibition?
With regards specifically to rating analysts and compensation?
Yeah.
I'd have to take that back.
Okay, so if you give great inflation, the company makes money, your stock options do better, and the SEC has no rule of which you're aware. And if you're not aware of the rule, it'd be very hard to think the rule's being enforced, since you're the one that would be enforcing the rule. The debt markets are obviously far more important to the economy, or at least involve far more capital than the stock markets. Those who invest are basically entirely dependent upon the ratings. Even if you know better, you're managing, say, the T. Rowe Price bond fund. If you decide to forego buying a AA rated bond that pays 20 basis points more, then I'm going to invest in Vanguard, because all I'm going to be able to do as an investor is decide which has the highest rating and the highest yield. I want to talk about one particular problem, that is the Peruvian agrarian reform bonds. Obviously, the way to make money is to try to get Peru as a client. It's a significant country, and one way to do that is to avoid even offering to rate these agrarian bonds that seem to be a part of a selective default. Is there any rule that says that a credit rating agency can't refuse to rate bonds because they can make more money from the issue, they're paid off one way or another not to rate them?
I'm generally familiar with the media coverage on the Peruvian bonds, and I can't obviously discuss the specifics of a.
Is there
bond or
any
substance.
rule that says you can, that you enforce that would prohibit Peru from saying, please don't comment on our agrarian bonds, and we'll make sure to give you a contract worth millions of dollars in some other part of our financial dealings? Is there any rule that you can point to that prohibits that?
The rules provide specifically for an absolute prohibition of rating analysts to be involved in sales and marketing
That's not
activity.
really, this is whether you take the engagement. Doesn't involve the rating analyst, involves the sales force.
The rule prohibits rating, the analytical function from being involved in the sales and marketing function. That's achieved by prohibiting analysts from being involved in sales and marketing or from being influenced.
That's not
by
what I'm
business
asking. The
considerations.
sales force decides whether to take the engagement. So if Peru pays them a few $1 million to say, just don't even get your credit rating analysts involved, don't let them look at it, don't take the engagement.
He's got the question. Do you have the answer?
In addition to the rule, there's a required certificate to accompany each rating action that says there was no influence of the other.
This is a non-rating action, sir. You're avoiding my question. The answer is obvious.
Okay, thank you. Afternoon. Hope you appreciate your little break. The committee is called back into session, and at this time recognize gentleman from Pennsylvania for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Garrett, for permitting me to participate in this hearing. This is a really important hearing. SEC oversight of the credit rating agencies and the United States Congress oversight over the SEC, especially as it relates to consumer protection, because each of the witnesses in their opening statements pretty much indicated one of the foundational principles of whether it's the whistleblower section, Office of Credit Rating Agencies, that investor protection is sort of central to what you do. I've been following a couple of issues that are the subject of the hearing today. The first, actually, slightly separate issue has to do with foreign companies that somehow get listed on the stock exchanges of our nation. They end up being fraudulent companies, many of them Chinese companies. We then find out that they're nothing but shell entities. A lot of U.S. investors have been hurt significantly. And I'm not going to ask the members of the panel to address this, but with the chairman's permission, I'd like to write to the members. I'll do it through the chairman's office. I'm concerned that either the SEC and or the United States Congress or us working together are not doing enough to protect investors. And so I want to follow up on that issue. But today I want to follow up on the issues that were raised by the members, Mr. Lynch and Mr. Sherman. Mr. Lynch is concerned, as am I, that we're not doing enough to stamp out conflicts of interest within the credit rating agency sector of our economy, of the financial services industry. We have a lot of work to do there. Mr. Butler, in response to Mr. Lynch's questions, you indicated, that in terms of full, compliance with new regulations that are being issued by the SEC, that you see this more as I think you said a journey rather than a destination. I would hope the destination is full compliance with all the new regulations, including stamping out all conflicts of interest. Maybe you can explain what you mean by journey rather than a destination. I would hope the journey is pretty quick and that we're not adrift in that journey. What did you mean by that it's more of a journey than a destination?
What I meant by that, Congressman, is compliance isn't an end state with that companies achieve, and then compliance is over. I view compliance as something that's needed every single day. The firms have large compliance staffs. They've been adding significantly to the numbers of their compliance staffs. They've been conducting reorganizations internally to effect enhanced compliance. And what I meant by saying it's a journey, not a destination, is that this is a continually evolving necessity. As the industry changes, as the types of products change, the types of compliance that's necessary within the firms may itself need to change.
Certainly you're concerned about conflicts within, especially the big three of the credit rating agencies, since those big three, they account for what, like 80% of the market?
We're very concerned about conflicts of interest across all the 10 registrants that are registered with the SEC.
I want to follow up on Mr. Sherman's questions about this Peruvian issue. Certainly you've seen the newspaper stories and the advertisements about the agrarian land bonds. You familiar with that?
I'm familiar with some of the media coverage about the bonds.
Can you explain to the committee what your understanding is of the conflict at this point?
With regard to the Peruvian bonds, I really don't have any particular details other than what the media reported, and it had to do with two of the rating agencies, one of which is registered with the SEC for sovereigns and one of which is not.
I'm looking at a Standard & Poor's rating services. This appears to be an analysis of the Republic of Peru done about 6 months ago, September 2015. Seems to have rated as investment grade with a stable outlook the sovereign debt or the bonds of the Republic of Peru. But you're familiar that there are other bonds issued by the government a couple of decades ago that are in default. You've heard that, correct?
I've seen the media articles on it. It's been a while since I read the media articles on it.
And you're aware that these same rating agencies are not willing to rate that debt for some reason? Are you aware of that?
Again, it's been a while since I've read the media coverage on it and the particulars.
With respect to this particular issue, what are the circumstances that a rating agency should be permitted to rate, new sovereign debt and get paid to do that, and that's part of their business model, we understand that, but ignore the requests of the investor community to rate other debt issued by the government that's in default? How is it the rating agencies get to pick and choose what debt they're going to rate and what debt they're not going to rate, especially when it affects small investors in the United States of America?
The rating agencies are required to establish, maintain, and enforce policies and procedures to address their conflicts of interest. And within that, there are conflicts of interest identified, which would be disclosure-based, and others that are absolutely prohibited. The prohibited conflicts would include the separation.
But what kind of discretion does a credit rating agency have to just decide on their own what they're going to rate and what they're not going to rate?
With regard to our oversight, Congressman, we look at the work and the work products that have been done. We don't have authority with regard to the substance of ratings or the procedure methodology.
I'll tell you what my concern is. My concern is that there are pension funds in half the states in this country that have invested the retirement savings of police officers, of firefighters, of building construction trades workers, average everyday Americans who are losing money in certain investments where Standard & Poor in this particular case has said, yeah, Republic of Peru is investment grade, but they're in default on other bonds. And I'm concerned that they're deciding what bonds are going to rate and what bonds are not going to rate, because if they rated these land bonds that were issued a couple decades ago and found out that they're all in default, that would affect all of the other ratings that they've issued. And that may have an effect on the ratings, not just of the Republic of Peru, but other corporate bonds that they've rated also within that governmental area. So I would ask you to take a look at that and question the rating agencies, 4 or 5 or how many there are, not very many, not enough, I would say, and question them as to how they're using the discretion, what to rate and what not to rate, whether there's a conflict inherent in that decision, and how many small investors, how many working class Americans are being affected, negatively impacted, losing retirement savings as a result. Would you do that for me?
Thank you, sir.
Would you do that?
I'm not at liberty to discuss the substance of an examination, but I'm happy to take your comment under advisement.
I'll follow it up with you. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks. And before I call him, the gentleman from Maine, I just want clarity as to one of the answers on that. When you say that there are already rules in place as far as the conflict of interest for what the decision by the rating agency, I think I understand what you're saying. But that conflict that they have is on the, that conflict that they have to make sure that there isn't a conflict of interest is on the, going forward, the decision on the entity that they're going to be rating tomorrow. So if they're rating the XYZ country or entity over here, they have to make sure there is no conflict in that decision, right, is what you're saying?
The new rules that were adopted in August 2014, effective June 2015, require there's a certificate with regard to any rating action. The rating action could be either a new issuance or a surveillance of an old rating.
Right. But it doesn't go to the point that the gentleman from Pennsylvania was making as far as their decision not to rate someone. There's no question. You don't look to see whether there was a conflict of interest when they decided we're not going to rate X, Y, and Z. Is that correct?
As it's currently crafted today, we're looking for surveillance activities and new issuance activities.
Okay. Thank you. With that, now